I would like to say a few words about introducing Frank. We met about a year ago. After I was tipped off by a sort of business region that there was an entrepreneur, a Dutch entrepreneur in Sweden, making inroads. And we thought we should try and get connected. And it actually wasn't me who first connected you, it was Schuil. But I spent some time at Frank's business, which he was running at the time for a year and a half, and now it's probably 2.5 years. Around 3 years, where he explained where he was coming from. And if you just sort of take it in a nutshell, it's always already like, that must be interesting. I mean, if you start off rapping, and always want to make that a professional career, and end up doing a startup, a series of startups, I should say, and end up with Bitcoins, then you immediately ask the question, okay, what happened in between? Now, what I learned when I talked to Frank, and he said what he was passionate about was things that were connecting the virtual world with the real world. I made it up, but I mean, it was around those themes, and you did 2 or 3 startups in that direction. I mean, when you were trying to do things with geo-positioning indoors, and then trying to connect it up with different things. Things which you built a lot of experience, and at a certain point you sold out because of issues, because doing a startup is not an easy thing. It always brings a lot of challenges. And in one way or another, it brought you to Sweden. I'm sure you're going to talk about that. And then ended up in doing another thing that we've all heard about, but very few really understand. And that is Bitcoins, and it's not for us. But what Frank is doing, and he's actually doing it with one of our partners, with Handelsbanken, who are still a little bit dubious around, I mean, whether they should be vocal around supporting this or whether they should not be vocal around supporting this. Yeah. And that is making the connect between what we call real money and virtual money. And Frank would say it's the wrong way around. My real money is real money, and the other one is traditional money. Now I'm going to leave the floor to Frank with this introduction. He's going to share a little bit of his personal story with us and introduce us in the world of blockchain and Bitcoins. And I'm sure we'll be following up with lots of questions and answers. Give him a great hand to Frank.
Well, I'll do my best on explaining blockchain. It's always like a rabbit hole that goes really deep. And as for the underground Dutch guy, yeah, it's when the bitterballen are when you're missing the bitterballen, that's when you resurface. So it's getting close. So who here has heard of Bitcoin? Oh, some hands up. Yeah. Who here bought some Bitcoins? 1, 2, 3. There we go. Oh yeah. So if you want to have some Bitcoins at the end of this, then download the blockchain.info app on the App Store, and I can QR code you some money. How about that? Free money. That should give me some points, please do. So I started with the title, The Wondrous World of Blockchain, and put a little unicorn on top of some blocks that represent the blockchain. The reason for that is that it holds a lot of promise. And everybody's diving onto this opportunity, but everybody's also sort of figuring out how this is actually going to work out and actually going to work for their organizations, their financial institutions, or as money as such if you're looking at cryptocurrency. So I tried to dive a little bit into what the differences are and what's real and what's not real. Done a bit about myself. Rex asked me to not only talk about blockchain, which I think is probably the most interesting part of this presentation, but also to tell me how I came to be in Sweden. So as he mentioned, yes, I started out as a rapper. There is the proof of me standing on stage. It was actually Studio 80 in Amsterdam for, what was it, the Breakthrough Thingy Awards where I was rapping. Nordea asked me to rap, and I said, if you beatbox, I'll rap. And then he didn't beatbox, so I didn't have to rap. So, I think I can skip that one here today as well. So I really wanted to become a professional rapper. Didn't work out entirely. I released an album, had a video at some point, and then I figured, okay, I'm never going to make money with this stuff, so that's not going to work. But interestingly enough, that one got me into the world of the virtual early on. When I was part of this online hip-hop community where you were battling it out, I was always wondering who were these people in real life. And there was this event where people came together from this hip-hop community, and I went there and it was a bar, and I was looking around and I didn't recognize anyone. So I wondered, there should be an app where you can actually know who's around you in real life and you can connect to them. Long story short, that was the start of my first company, was IRL Connect, in real life connect, with the idea that you mirror what's happening in the real world in a virtual world and that you can interact with. Big promises, big ideas, execution, not so much. But well, I wouldn't say that. The first interface that we designed was pretty much what you have now in Locate Your Friends on the App Store. So it was in 2006-07 that we were designing it, so the first iPhone just came out. Still looking back at those streams, it's like, okay, yeah, we designed that way before everyone else, but the technology wasn't really there yet to do what we wanted to do. And there were other companies that tried to do similar things with creating ad hoc social network on the go, but none of them today still have really succeeded. Maybe some people have heard of Foursquare that did sort of the check-in that worked somewhat, but still it's not really taking off that everybody's using that to, see who's around you in a room. So this is a promise that I think one day will come through. For me, it didn't really happen. We did build great technology there where you could see anything happening in real time around you on the map. I sold my shares in that company and I moved on to the next thing. One spin-off project of that was Verbeterde Buurt.nl, which still exists today. It was about improving your municipality by giving ideas and pointing out problems on a map, and then it would connect to local municipalities to solve these problems. I still think that should be more widely applied in any country. We based it off of a concept of the UK and uses our mapping technology to develop it for the Dutch market. And I think it's still working. I don't know how successful it is, but I really enjoyed that project. And then I went the most logical next direction, which became ClickLex, a fashion brand. Why not? So I was on the plane with a friend of mine who thought it was a great idea to bring back the ClickLex. Do you remember the slap bracelets? So we started with a company. And we did that, so it's still live at clicklex.com. We sold some, the designs are so-so, but it's a fun side project. And then I started my next sort of serious startup, which brought me to Sweden. So that was, since IRL Connect was all about positioning and connecting data to geographical layers, I was already sort of in that market. And I got to know my co-founder of my company, next company was called Cubulus, which was doing indoor positioning. So that is basically what GPS outside, we were doing inside buildings. Quite complex, I'll save you the details, but it worked really well. We did an implementation of Rabobank in the Netherlands, and we did some proof of concept at Singtel, Schiphol in the Netherlands. Long story short, we grew a little bit too fast and ran out of money, and then it blew up, and I took over as CEO of the company, but it was a little bit too late. So that company ultimately didn't make it. But it was an interesting point in time for me because I was sitting at the same office of our investor, and it was a company called Higemo, which also doesn't exist anymore, but that's how it goes in startups. And they were doing something that they wanted to transfer calories for people, obese people in let's say, the United States, and they get too fat, drink too much Coke, and then they want to transfer those calories to people who need calories in the developing world and malnourished people. So they invented the idea of a virtual currency that you could use to exercise, by which you earn the points that you can then transfer to these people in terms of donations. So it was kind of a novel idea and sort of my first introduction to virtual currencies and the idea of what you could potentially do by thinking of currencies in a different way. Then a little bit later on, I founded Safello, and I will share my first experience with that in my next slide. But the basis for that, for how I got into Safello, was then that in 2012 I heard about people mining in this university, which I thought was interesting, and of course, based on what I knew from this other company that was sitting with me, I was kind of intrigued of what this would be. And then at the end of 2012, somebody told me about Bitcoin, and it was coincidentally the same day and the same location by the same guy who also introduced me to my current fiance. So there must be some faith, if you will. So that was, at that point for me, the price was $15. And I'll show you that on the next slide, because the last project that I have on the list here, so obviously I'm working with Safello full time now, is that my twin boys that arrived in last year. So that's my last, and I think still the most important project that I have there. So about the journey of how I got into cryptocurrency, so that's the backstory. I was more or less on the trading side of stocks, looking at penny stock, for instance, where you have a lot of volatility, but you don't necessarily have the liquidity to meet a price. So the interesting things that first captured my attention was what I knew from the potential virtual currencies, as well as this potential that I felt you could make money off of it because you could actually meet your price point. So I was looking at, so this is the timeline of the Bitcoin price over time. So starting in January 2009, all the way to where we are now today. So the first block, as they call it, that was ever mined, where it came into existence, was called the Genesis block. And then a whole time of sort of nothing. Although at this time there was a little spike, which at that point in time was a very big thing, but at the current state it doesn't look like it almost doesn't register anymore. And at the arrow there, I don't know, I can point maybe with this thing, yeah, at the arrow there is where I got interested in Bitcoin. The price was around $14, $15, and I wanted to invest in it. But I wanted to do it through my Dutch corporation that I was still setting up. So I waited a little bit because I wanted to have that corporate structure set up. So I waited, and it was too slow, and then of course the bubble hit in April 2013. So here suddenly the price went to $266. And there are different reasons for people, that people are stating why that was the case. Most commonly people are saying that the Cyprus crisis at the time meant that people were trying to find different ways to find cash. So for instance with Greece, where there was the financial crisis, people were trying to find different ways to actually move money around. And a similar thing happened in Cyprus, where people were trying to use money where they couldn't. So that price went from $266, mostly of course speculation off of that. And then it went down, and I had awoken to the fact that obviously I missed something. So instead of just crying about that I could have made a lot of money, I decided, okay, what is this? What is this about? And I want to figure out what this really is, at least from a speculative point of view. So when has anyone here heard of MTGOX? Raise your hands. So MTGOX was the largest, by far the largest Bitcoin exchange in the world. They were at the high point trading almost 80% of the total volume. And they had over $500 million in assets that they held for customers. So that was a very interesting one until it just went up in smoke and all the money was gone. Which then at the time people thought like Bitcoin went broke and Bitcoin is broken, but it was actually somebody who was operating with this exchange that held the customer funds, and they didn't have a good security and didn't have a good architecture to deal with it. Nothing to do with the actual Bitcoin protocol. But this is what it looked like, and I had to wire money to like this Polish account, although it was a Japanese exchange, and then once the money arrived, I could exchange it and I could send it back. And for me, it was an eye-opening moment that you suddenly have this virtual currency that you can move anywhere. And then I also saw that there were a whole bunch of different cryptocurrencies, like Ripple. So the top 10 is Bitcoin, has a market cap of about 10 billion, I'll come back to it later. And then you have Ethereum, and then you have Ripple, which is the third largest one. And at the time it was the second, or I think also the third largest one behind Litecoin, which was a copy of Bitcoin. And I remember that I wanted to get them because I knew that the earlier coins would obviously appreciate most in value. And it took me literally a day to get it. That was how hard it was then. Even though for you, if you guys were trying Bitcoin today, you would still find it hard. But at that time, it took me literally a day because you had to go in a form, beg for some free money, and then somebody would need to have to give you that money, but the only way to get it, I had to grant them access to do so and so on. So if I'm going too deep, raise your hand and I'll come back to higher level Bitcoin stuff. But that was my experience at the time, so it took me a day to do that. And in doing so, I got this little bit of a mind-blowing moment, feeling about how you can interact with these currencies. So if you're familiar with games, you obviously can earn like points and stuff like that. And it's really like a free way of dealing with these points, and you can do any kind of thing. But the interesting thing about cryptocurrency is that it actually has monetary, real economic value. So suddenly you have the means to send money anywhere, within a fraction of a second at a fraction of the cost, and you can just play around with it. And that's very much those early days was about. And we see over time that narrative has changed. So you have people initially, the early Bitcoiners, if you will, were very much focused on the currency, and then 2015, I would say, the banks had the narrative of a blockchain technology, which I'll come back to. And now we start slowly seeing this new narrative, this early narrative come back about the currency, what that can mean for global trade and for the economy, etc. So I had that wow moment that, okay, what could you potentially do with this currency? What can you do with the underlying technology? And it makes you question, what is money? How can I change? How is money made? And how can we deal with money? And how much money is there? Why would blockchain solve things? Stuff like that. So I started, with the question, what is money then? So money is a means to exchange, right? So it's very simply put, you have something of one thing and you have someone else has something of another thing, and you need to have a means of exchange, because if you have 5 cows and somebody has 5 cheeses, it's hard to exchange it if you don't have a means of exchange. So that's money. That's money. And the history of money starts all the way back to 1200 BC China. We had cowrie shells, which are these little shells. And why did they make good money? They were portable, so you could carry them around. They were divisible, so the interesting thing about this one is the little hole in that shell actually represents a different value. So now we would put on a note, you have 100 SEK and 50 SEK, you have a different note. But at the time they created this little hole in the shell that created a different value for this little shell. They're durable, so these shells are, they don't perish. They're sufficiently rare. These shells were found in the Indian Ocean, and they were quite hard to get and to find, so there was a limited amount of them. And they were fungible, which is quite important. You need to have one, if you have one shell, another shell, that you can exchange them without seeing a difference. So, for instance, gold is also fungible, because if you melt gold, you will always have the same gold. I hope that makes sense. And they're unconsumable. I mean, you can eat them, but not so much. So that was the first type of money. And I'll come back to why money matters and how it relates to banking and how it relates to blockchain. But going through this, there's a little bit of a perspective on it. So then we had coins in China, 1000 before Christ. Then we have paper money, which we're using in a different form today. It was this is what the earliest types of money look like on paper. And then we had the first bank. So with the introduction of banking, you can then suddenly loan money, and you have a ledger in which you keep track of who owns what. And that's an important thing that I will come back to, because that's how the world works today, that you have ledgers of who owns what to whom. And then typically that's money that's registered in these ledgers. So then I skipped quite a few years ahead again, and we have the first digital currency. It was in the year 1996, so the early days of the internet. And it was a company called eGold. And they created the first digital currency, which in many ways is similar to a cryptocurrency, but it had one major difference, and that it was that it was an entity that was issuing it. And that means that it was a central point of attack. So you could go to the company and say, hey, this is illegal, and we shut you down. And that's what happened. eGold's no longer around anymore. So we have to skip a little bit further now, and then we get to Bitcoin, 2009. And it's based on a lot of other, there's a combination of technologies that Bitcoin, why it came about, which is the experimentation of the other currencies, but also advances in decentralized technologies. You have uTorrent for file sharing and stuff like that, all this peer-to-peer technology. And that's the basis of those advances, as well as the cryptocurrency, advance itself is what made Bitcoin happen. Now, who invented Bitcoin? We don't know. It was an anonymous inventor called Satoshi Nakamoto. Still today, we don't know who it is. There have been claims by many people, and there was this Dr. Greg Wright in Australia that was claiming to be. He went on the BBC and then retracted it. But it doesn't really matter, because Bitcoin is an open source protocol. So it's the first blockchain, which I'll come back to what the difference is between Bitcoin and blockchain. But it was the first one that was released to the world, and it was open source, so you can actually look at the code and see what's going on. So aside from that, we don't know who put it on there, we actually can look at the code and see that it's not malicious. This is coming back to why Bitcoin was invented. For the inventor, at least, it definitely had motives on the backlash of the financial crisis. So in 2008, you obviously had the financial crisis, and this is the article of that specific day that this Genesis block, the first block in the blockchain, that was Bitcoin blockchain, and they put a link, a hash, they call it, in the first block that linked to this article, which is a Times article with a headline, "Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks." So there was a protest link in this actual Bitcoin blockchain. And the philosophy of what Bitcoin was supposed to become was very clear, to be digital cash with an objective to replace central banking. Which is not necessarily what blockchain can be used for, because it can be used in a much wider sense. So now thinking about money and the ledgers, if I'm going too deep, just let me know. If you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll try and answer in between. Anyone have any questions in the meantime before I dive further? Many? Okay, great. So you have these ledgers of financial institutions that are keeping track of who owns what, and you have money. But money, of course, was in the beginning of time quite easy to handle, but over time, more and more money and more debt obligations are created in the financial system. So today there's about $80.9 trillion globally, which is including your checking account, deposits, and cash. If we look at the amount of global debt, so these are the obligations that are somewhere registered in the ledger, it's over $199 trillion. And then if we think about the new economy, and part of obviously the reason of the financial crisis, if we look at derivatives, so it's a bit much bigger number. Does anyone know what the Q stands for? I always ask this question, it's fun. Anyone, the Q? Sorry? Yeah, you got it right, quadrillion. So it's 1,000 trillion, so 1.2 quadrillion is 1,200 trillion dollar. That's on ledgers in different financial institutions, in different databases stored, with backups, tape backups that try to communicate with each other. So if you envision all of these obligations and all of this money on all of these systems around the world and trying to communicate these obligations to each other, you can start seeing that the legacy systems might be a little bit problematic for the modern world. And this is really the basis for what blockchain technology is trying to solve. This problem of all these ledgers that are not able to communicate with each other. So what is Bitcoin blockchain then? So I put aside Bitcoin blockchain. So blockchain very simply put, takes the notion of a ledger. So now we have many ledgers around the world, and everybody pretty much maintains their own ledger that tries to communicate with another ledger of another financial institution or another entity. And it takes the notion, hey, what if we create one ledger and we actually use that as the ground truth, and we put it on computers all over the world that maintain that this is the one ledger with the real values. That's it, very simple. So it's one ledger that is maintained by computers all over the world to make sure that this is a valid transaction that is happening in this ledger. Is that easy enough? And the thing that is being transacted on this ledger, that's what we essentially call Bitcoin. So it's, in the case of what you saw in the first graph, the value of this token that is being transacted is what we call Bitcoin, and it's pretty much how you probably know Bitcoin as this currency that has a certain price. But at the same time, this token is just a means to transfer value, which can have any type of value. So you can actually, for instance, attach an asset to it, and you can transfer that. Right? So it has, in that sense, a lot more potential to transfer any kind of value over the, instantly over the world. So that's the power of blockchain. That you have this global network of computational power is used to maintain this network. And it allows you to maintain one single record of truth.
So decided on that.
Who?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Who decided on this, that this is the blockchain, that this is what we now do?
It was invented and it got momentum, and you saw the growth, so it really was bottom-up adoption. Obviously it started as a big experiment, and people still call it an experiment today, but it's an experiment that is now over 10 billion in market cap. So the actual rules for how the transactions are approved are baked into the actual protocol. So the computers that are maintaining this, they need to sort of approve with 51% that it is a legit transaction. And the way of doing that is through computational power that they have to use to prove that they're doing this calculation to be able to prove the transaction. Sorry. Now it's a little bit complex there. So there the rabbit hole goes quite deep because it's maintaining itself as a sort of live organism where it's adjusting the difficulty of this puzzle to actually predict the money supply from the 21 millions that can ever be created. Simply put, you have a block with transactions in it, and that's the one that they need to solve. So when they solve this block, they get both rewarded with new bitcoins and transactions fees for solving this block. And it's a chain of transactions linked together. So that's why it's a ground truth that always you can look back and what happened there. The way to solve this block is to put computational power to use. And that's all baked into the protocol.
Can I have it? Because I mean,
yeah, I go quite deep.
Can I have another go at this?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So if you do a deal with me, I need to write it in my books, you need to write it in your books, and we can always compare, or you have to have a notary who says this is the right thing.
Right.
This is in today's world.
Yes.
It was invented in Venice, or was it in Italy at the time, in 1300 or so. What this does says, I owe you, you owe me, or we pay something, and we make an encryption around it that you cannot mess with anything, ever.
Yes.
And anybody can read it across the whole world. Because if you mess with it, either time or any slight detail, you can see it's messed with. So you have a universal record of a transaction between you and me that nobody can mess with. And that is what blockchain technology does in a very simple way. Now how, I mean, we'll leave it aside, but it is something where anybody in the whole world can actually say, that transaction, I can read it, this is valid. So you don't need a notary, you don't need ledgers, you don't need lots of expensive people, but you need to basically create the transaction, and then it's encrypted with a lock. And once it's locked, there's no way anymore to ever, let me say, undo it.
Well, no, yeah, okay.
You can make a new transaction, but that series of transactions is basically...
You would need to have the computational power of more than a majority of the network.
More than a majority.
So then you can manipulate it. Yeah. So there's always ifs and buts with it. And interestingly enough, it has also happened with one of the other currencies where there was a proposal to change the blockchain because some theft has happened pretty much. So they did a proposal, it was Ethereum, and it was called the DAO, and they actually proposed a hard fork, what it was called. And then they changed the blockchain. But the other one also existed. So what happened
You're
was...
confusing us again.
I am confusing you, yeah, I'm sorry. It's never black and white. And it's a hard subject on the technicalities, but what Rex is saying is right. If you know it on the high level, that's what it does. It's a single record of truth, and in principle, it cannot be tampered with, and it's a universal truth. So, shall we keep it there? No, we're not.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, maybe you can tell us why we should use Bitcoins.
Yes.
And maybe coming to that later.
Well, I mean, what I was describing with how much money there is and how many debt there is in the world, and the systems that are trying to maintain this and communicate with each other, means that there's delay and there's inefficiencies in the system that blockchain solves. So this is pretty much across any industry and using any type of regular technology today. And what this can do by changing sort of the way the underlying technology works is that you just have a more efficient global system. So what does it mean? Instead of having to, when we're talking about finance, instead of having to wait a couple of days to send money to, let's say, the US, it will take maybe a week in some cases, and then you have a clearing bank that has to approve the transaction and so forth, and it can be denied by one of the clearing banks, so you need to wire it again. It's just instant. without any third party being involved in it. So I can send as little as 1 cent to the US instantly, at a very low cost, or I can send $20 million at the same cost over the same network. So it's really about efficiency in this case the financial system, but people are trying to apply this technology to the healthcare. They're trying to apply it to accounting. They're trying to apply it to identity and trade finance. All of these other applications that are beyond the financial system to use the same principle of blockchain technology to make it more efficient. Does that answer your question to some degree?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I have another question.
Yes.
Does it prevent a banking crisis?
Well, that's a high-level question. In a sense, yeah. So if we're looking, now we're talking deep about how the financial system works. You have a Frank Schuil reserve system, right? So how banking works today is that a bank lends money from the central bank, and then only needs to keep a portion of that on their books, and the rest they can lend out again. That's money creation. So that can mean that you can have a bank run because all the money that's on the books is not necessarily in the big vault that you can go through. So this sort of paper digital value is not necessarily reflected on something that they can give to you instantly. Which is obviously in the financial crisis what happened, that you have all these obligations and people stop lending and giving each other money, which is why the whole system comes to a squeaking halt. Blockchain in the sense of Bitcoin is a direct value transfer. So I would send you money directly over the blockchain, and you can look at, for instance, since it's a transparent ledger, you can look at proof of reserves, like who has money where. And if people are moving money elsewhere, you will be able to see it. So it's very transparent in that way. So theoretically, yes, it might mean that you want to have Bitcoin as a global reserve currency, for instance. So there are people who are advocates of that. At the same time, you have, let's say, the Bank of England that is looking, hey, how can we use cryptocurrency to issue our own virtual currency? What the future will hold is a little bit too early to tell in that sense. But it's the promise is that it will be able to solve these issues, because that's what the financial crisis was about, and which is also why the Genesis block showed that specific article, because it has that ambition to ultimately replace the central banks, or be the global reserve currency.
How can I use it?
That's another question. So.
Yeah, I don't want to mess up your story, so maybe.
No, that's okay. I don't care. The usage of Bitcoin. I can go a couple of slides here because it does address. Let me go here. So this is the market cap today, right? So it's 12 billion of all the cryptocurrencies that exist, but there are hundreds and hundreds of cryptocurrency. You can go online and say click, and you can create your own cryptocurrency. The point is, of course, which ones are the biggest ones, which can survive, and which one will have a longer-term impact on our economy and all the other industries that it can potentially disrupt. So right now, as we speak, 80% of the market cap is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is by far the largest, obviously has been around the longest since 2009. So it's the only sort of battle-tested Bitcoin out there. Then the runner-up is Ethereum, which is a platform that seeks to use more new blockchain technology to do what they call smart contract. And they are 1 billion in the market cap. So they're the runner-up, and then you have Ripple, and I think they're around $200 million. So Bitcoin is by far the biggest one, and that's where people have been trying to most to actually create bottom-up adoption from users. So with Bitcoin, you could pay on a web shop through a company called BitPay. You can pay for Amazon items, and you can basically shop online with Bitcoin. Pretty much every website through Purse.io, I think you can buy whatever you want online. There has also been companies that have connected your Bitcoin wallet as a debit card to a Bitcoin wallet, so you can go with your credit card, which is now connected to your Bitcoin wallet, and just buy stuff anywhere. So that's already possible. I had one, I don't have one anymore. The company unfortunately went out of business, that one. There are more companies doing it. But I went to a food truck with my debit card here in Stockholm, and I ordered a burger with Bitcoin ultimately. So it was iZettle there, and I put in my credit card, and when that transaction happened, it took Bitcoins from my Bitcoin wallet. So you can shop anywhere and buy anything with Bitcoin. Is it user-friendly enough? Is it...
But what did that guy at food truck say?
He didn't say anything because he didn't know it was Bitcoin.
But how is it possible? I don't get that.
Because you have an exchange.
So you have a card, debit card, that is on the back end linked to a Bitcoin wallet. So it was, when it did the transaction for the merchant, it went through the normal network. But in the back end of that, there was a settlement between the Bitcoin wallet. So it happened instantly, just like a normal transaction, but it added a layer to it, which is that connection. So for me, I just topped off my Bitcoin bank account, if you will, the Bitcoin wallet they call it. And when that transaction happened, they took the Bitcoins, converted it to regular currency, so it was settled with the merchant with a regular currency.
Where is that connected to Bitcoin to the regular currency?
I'm sorry?
Where is that connected? Is it in the bank?
In this case, it was connected by the supplier. So they took part, they obviously had a bank that they cooperated with, but it was connected to the one who made the transaction from the regular currency to the Bitcoins. That settlement was done by this company. Yeah. So they have a software platform that was handling it. And of course you can, put that anywhere you like. You can put that in a custodial setup with a licensed company if you rather have it than some company that maybe doesn't have a banking license, for instance. But no bank is...
That you bought in 2000.
I made some money. That's okay. Yeah. I didn't buy it with Bitcoins and others, but it went up, but I didn't sell at the highest point. So it's now back at $500, $600. No, 600.
611.
611. Yeah, there you go. Today. I think it went up 500% or something. So, but I won't tell you how much I bought. But it's good enough.
When you're buying Bitcoins,
Yeah.
it comes from your normal bank account, I suppose.
Yes.
How takes such a transaction place?
So that's what we're doing with my company. So we are a registered financial institute in Sweden, and we have a connection with Handelsbanken. So we have a website, safello.com, and when you go there, you can have to verify your identity, and then we have different payment methods. So once we verify your identity, you just have your Swish app, and you swish us money with an order message, and then the next day, or actually it's Swish within an hour, you get your Bitcoins to your Bitcoin address.
And how about laundering?
About
laundering?
launder money.
Yeah.
So that's why we have full KYC. On our back end,
You need to explain.
know your customer. So this is what so there's a European legislation called the AML directive, anti-money laundering directive, and part of that is that you need to do KYC, is know your customer. So you need to know who's on your platform. And we're a registered financial institute, so institute or institution, it's the lower level one, for those who know the specifics. Anyway, so we do anything from politically exposed person screening, sanctionless screening, people uploading their ID, people uploading utility bill. We even do on the back end, we do Bitcoin forensics. So we have partnered up with this company where we can actually look at the propagation of the Bitcoins on the network to know whether it's maybe potentially affiliated with a black market like Silk Road, if anyone has heard of that. So there are already all these tools for anti-money laundering, and it's getting more and more advanced, and there's more and more data on it. And the interesting thing for people who are new to Bitcoin is that they think, oh, but isn't it anonymous? It's pseudonymous. It's pseudonymous. Of course, you can send one little transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain if you maybe bought it with cash somewhere, and then you got a Bitcoin address and put it on there, and you send it to another Bitcoin address. But the interesting thing is that as soon as you try to get to the wide economy, if you will, if you want to make a distinction, or the regular economy, the fiat currency, you will touch a point like a company like ours where you need to identify yourself. And even if you don't, then still the propagation on the network is done in such a way that you can still identify patterns. So, if you talk about a drug lord with millions and millions of dollars, people would instantly see that that money is moving around, and it would strike attention.
But since it's worldwide,
yes.
Which tax authorities have control?
Oh, that's a whole different question. You know, it's an open source technology, a peer-to-peer technology, so there's no authority, right? There's no authority on the actual protocol. So it's more the companies that are handling Bitcoins and the private individuals that hold Bitcoins that are personally responsible, or as a company responsible to handle with the Bitcoins. So it's an interesting question, and every jurisdiction is trying to find out now within their jurisdiction how we're going to handle this. On the European level, we've been part of a VAT case that started in Sweden that we co-financed that went all the way to the European Court of Justice to rule that no VAT will apply to Bitcoin. So that was a great win for us, and also there would not be VAT on the commission. And all of that regulatory landscape is forming now, and people, you know, different jurisdictions look upon this very differently. In the US, you have the New York BIT license, which is very tough license, where a lot of companies that were operating in New York City, they actually moved out of New York, the state of New York. And there are only a few that are still operational that were able to even afford that BIT license. Whereas in a jurisdiction as, let's say, China, no, Russia, it's currently prohibited pretty much, and it's still more a question whether you can deal with it. And I think in Iceland you cannot buy it, but you can sell it. So there's all of these different characteristics to how this regulatory framework is taking shape.
But if you, let's say in your example of the food truck, then it just sounds like a gimmick, because it can perfectly be done in sec to sec.
Exactly, that's why it was a gimmick.
The Bitcoin is still, for me indeed, it's Tor, dark web, Silk Road, that's, you want to have anonymity, and then you can make the transaction.
Yeah, so I have, let's use this as a happy deck. So I have some slides about adoption, which I think are, because that's the question, of course, it's mostly speculation today. That is the biggest market. And it's also used on the dark markets and stuff like that. There's a lot of transactions taking place on regular merchant websites, but still by far the largest transaction volume happens in speculation today. And the reason for that is several-fold, but I'll start with, you know, typical bell curve of innovation. We're sort of on the early, you know, I don't know if is anyone not familiar with this? You have this bell curve of innovation of where the life cycle of any product or new innovation. And it starts with innovators that are the very early adopters that either invented or part of the very first adoption, and then you have the early adopters that are more part of the wider audience. Now, technically, depending on the potential, let's say if it becomes a global reserve currency, then I think we're sort of here, right? We're about 10 million wallets, 12 million wallets now globally, so 12 million unique wallets, which means potentially 12 million users. We don't know exactly because you can't always tie an identity to a Bitcoin address on a population of billions. So in that perspective, we're very early on. And the question then is how do we move from here to here? And like you say, it's quite a, from your perspective on, hey, how does this help me in any way? It's kind of a hard sell right now. And there's different reasons for that, and I made a little bit of a graph. So you have current banking systems that are already improving. So you have people who are like Handelsbanken and Nordea and SEB, they're creating their own mobile apps. They're trying to innovate the services to the customers, and they're innovating. Then on top of that, you have fintech companies that are already disrupting the existing financial players, the banks and other financial institutions. And that looks a little bit like this. So this is a typical bank website. And this used to be sort of a traditional bank website with a whole bunch of services that a bank tries to service on their banking license. And this is also the difficulty that banks now are facing because they are being disrupted by all of these startups. So every single service on this particular website from HSBC, they put a fintech company against it. So here you have, I guess you have eToro is a social trading platform. Tink is a Swedish company that does payments on mobile using the new AML directive, if anyone knows about that, to directly do all your banking services on there. You have a company called Holvi that has created a new type of bank that was sold to BBVA. So this is what's happening already with banking, and these services are already providing a better user experience. But it's still built on top of the traditional rails of what we've been using for many decades. And that's where the fundamental problem is, because that is coming back to that ledger, all of these ledgers on different systems that try to communicate to each other. It's this huge inefficiency. But the question then becomes, for a company like ours, we sort of need to be in line with that, as you say. It's just like a gimmick, so you don't see the added value in it, and we need to do some magic on top. I haven't clearly defined this one. We have, of course, within our company. And I like to put this quote there from a Stanford professor, Paul Safello, that says it takes 30 years for a new idea to seep into culture. Technology does not drive change. It is our collective response to the options and opportunities presented by technology that drives change. It will take time. It's a very fundamental change to a very large system. And where I see the opportunities come, like if you look at sort of the innovation, you have now the protocol layers that is being developed. So that's Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all these cryptocurrencies. And then you have the sort of service infrastructure level that is being developed. So those are the exchanges where you can start exchanging a little bit of money. And then below that is the mining, so the actual people that are maintaining the protocol. Then you have the infrastructure level, and only then are we coming to the application level, where cool stuff are going to happen for consumers and small medium businesses that they can do stuff with. We as a company, Safello, we are looking at how we can crack that nut, because that's sort of the killer app that you like to invent in order to show the world like this is widespread adoption. And we work quite closely with a strategic design firm to dive deep into the behavior of people in their current financial lives. And we actually came to the conclusion that it's still too early, and that we really need to focus on the cryptocurrency crowd. It is a little bit of an elitist type of crowd now that sees how the current financial system is broken, and that money, if you ask people where money comes from, they don't understand it, and that the future, it might take a black swan event to really open people's eyes to how broken the system is. And that's the crowd that's now using Bitcoin and speculating in Bitcoin, with the hope that that will take off for other cryptocurrency. But the hardcore innovations will take a lot longer time. If we're talking about blockchain inefficiencies, or blockchain to solve inefficiencies in the existing financial banking world, we're talking about legacy system in a typical bank that are still using mainframe technology in a language called COBOL, which is developed in the 60s. And there's one guy that knows this language that then paying a lot of money to just maintain it, because the cost to switch to anything else is more expensive.
Who is very old?
Very, very old and very experienced. So they're paying them, ridiculous amounts of money, because it's just cheaper to maintain. And to make any type of small changes on this, I talked to somebody who sold the company to BBVA, who worked on the actual banking architectural systems. And he said even to make the tiniest change is a whole process. So for that to move in a direction like we're going to replace it all by blockchain is, it's a top-down hard thing to do. And that's why I always advocate the cryptocurrency bottom-up adoption, where we're seeing already 12 million wallets and services being developed, and a lot of the cool stuff is happening there. That I think that will go faster. But yeah,
there's a simple question there that I don't think you've really answered this yet. And then you say, well, this is a given. How would it really, can you give a glimpse or an example of how it would make life better for a consumer?
Yeah.
Easier for a consumer. Then at least we have an idea of why it's there.
It changes money, so I think that's personally, I think that's a good part. So that's more the macro impact that it would have on your life long term. In terms of practical applications, the way we as Safello are looking at it is that we see an opportunity to tie one identity to our platform, and then because everything is on the blockchain, you can open up to any kind of service. So our vision is to essentially create an app store for financial service. So instead of having to sign up to all these fintech companies, for instance, you would have one entry to everything that you want to do, both with your financial life and with smart contract technology on your legal life. So that's just a lot of convenience, and it's cost efficient, and it's going to be more fun. It's going to be easier to obviously transact internationally. That's sort of what I see from a consumer perspective. The most interest that you see in the financial world is on like trade finance cases and just removing the paperwork from everything, where supply chain stuff, where there's a lot of legacy paperwork that you have to fill in every step in the process. So there's a lot of potential that the traditional financial institutions are looking at. But for me, I get excited about, well, if you were spending like a couple of months trying things out, you can see how cool they are. Like the DAO is a great example of what I think is awesome from a user point of view. It was called a decentralized autonomous organization. And the idea was that anyone just fund this organization, and it did with $150 million, a little bit too much for an experiment, and it went wrong. But they funded this organization to invest in ideas in companies. So you had this organism where people came up with ideas and they could vote with their coins, and then suddenly they start funding with real money, like real economic value, into all of these ideas. So it gives a kind of openness and transparency that we don't have with finance today. So I like to say, people have said it before me, but what the internet did to information and making it open and free, that blockchain is doing to finance and money. And that's really the premise of how I look at this. And it's like the early days of the internet. It might seem clunky and hard right now, but in a decade's time, like we've got Facebook, we've got LinkedIn, we've got all we got a computer in our pockets, and we can all do these amazing things. So that's what we're going to see in a decade's time.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, it's of course, that's also why I raised the question, because it's future.
Yeah.
How it will materialize funding and what will be the real.
So the real value right now is not in the developed world, but it's in the developing countries. You have countries like in Argentina where they have an inflationary currency, right? And the value of a Bitcoin, even though it fluctuates, is much more stable for them to have in their pocket than their local currency. So for a lot of the use cases now that really have an impact on people's lives are not here in the developing world where we have existing, good financial infrastructure. It's in the 2.5 billion people that are unbanked and underbanked that are now getting access to the financial system that they soon are going to be interacting with the rest of the world. So that's where now it's happening, and it will slowly start seeping into the rest of the world. But that's where now all of the usage is.
But how does the price of Bitcoin fluctuate? I don't understand, because you say we're now at actually right in the beginning of the curve, right? So when more people want to have it, how does it work? Is it because there's more demand, the price is going up for the Bitcoin? Or
Well, yeah, typically. So it's a more,
So, but then in this case, I suggest that we all buy Bitcoins tonight, because if we're still in the early stages of the curve, which means that, yeah.
So, well, yeah, but I wouldn't give any investment advice, but
No.
if you believe in a future where there is a new global reserve currency and it is a cryptocurrency, then from an investment point of view, obviously Bitcoin is now in the lead, so you could invest, let's say, X% of your portfolio in a different cryptocurrency. However, it could also be one ultimately that means that is issued by the central bank, or it could be a whole new currency that doesn't exist today. So I would still, there's some risk with it, or it could even be corporate coins, right? So there's no reason why Amazon and Apple couldn't start creating their own money. They already have in some way, but the power of cryptocurrency is that it now can be interchangeable with any type of other people's money, right? So all of the money that I saw with Eagle, that was a whole different generation of money where, it's like your air miles. It's one entity, one company that interacts separately in a siloed way. And what Bitcoin is and cryptocurrency blockchain is doing is opening it up where all of these can start talking to each other.
But what does this mean for your company, if you're saying?
Hopefully good things, but that depends on whether we're around long enough. Yeah. So the problem for our company is that we're at the stages of on the bell curve that's very early, where the way to monetize it for us is very much on the speculative side. So whereas our ambitions are more like how can we get this to the average consumer. So that's really like a timing point of view, like when can we get to that point in time that we can offer that. So we need investment money, or investors with deep pockets, or we need to find ways to now make our company cash flow positive, so we can stay around long enough, so we can see that curve through.
You had a question?
How is then actually the money created? So if we all want to buy,
Exactly.
of course the price goes up, but it's demand
If
and
you guys
supply.
buy, the price won't go up.
No, let's say, but I mean more it's demand and supply. So what actually creates bitcoins?
So that's baked in the protocol. The creation of Bitcoin is baked into the protocol. The market price for the token Bitcoin is set by market players, right? So you have it's just like the normal Forex exchange market. You might get a different price depending on which, whether you go to Forex or you go to, let's say, name another one. Handelsbanken. You have a different current exchange rate, right? So there are a whole bunch of platforms, and in initial stages of Bitcoin, let's say a couple of years ago, the price between one price that was offered on one platform and another one might be $20 difference. But since the market is getting more efficient and getting more mature, you start seeing that the arbitrage opportunities between those two prices are being solved by people who are trading in Bitcoin.
But I have to enter by paying, let's call it real money, or how can I enter?
Well, you can enter.
You can give me one, you said, but if I want
You
to
can
buy
go
it,
to our website, you can register, verify your identity, you can create a Bitcoin address with the that you set, or you can create it somewhere else. You can then put this Bitcoin address in a little field, and the first step is like, how much money do you want to buy for? Then you put the Bitcoin address. Let me show you. How about that? Do we have internet here? No. I have a slide here. I have a slide. Let me show you. I think I have a slide with an animation. So this is our website today. So you put in the currency that you want to buy in, the amount of money you want to buy it for. In this case, I have a Bitcoin wallet connected, but otherwise you put in this Bitcoin address, a string of letters or numbers in there. You select your payment method and you confirm your payment. Then you send the money to us. We receive it on our bank account in Handelsbanken, and we execute the payment automatically. So depending on the payment methods, it can be sort of like an hour transaction, or it can be the next day. So we don't take the volatility risk, but we would execute pretty much bank gyro within a day. And then you get the Bitcoins on your Bitcoin wallet account, and then you can do whatever.
Do you have an interest on that?
Of course, we make money off that. That's our business model.
Do you have an interest rate for people who have Bitcoin?
We don't have a Bitcoin wallet today, and even if we did, we wouldn't give an interest rate. I don't know of any company, except for some there are future exchanges that particularly trade in futures, but otherwise there are no companies that I know of that just pay interest. And the ones who do, you should be very wary of, because they typically offer great interest, but you can be sure that the default rate is really high.
You had a question?
Yes. Good questions, people.
When I bought my Bitcoins, did it on an ATM?
Yes, that's possible.
That was placed up in Mosebacke.
Yeah.
Were you behind that guy?
We were the company that bought the first Bitcoin ATM to Europe, or at least to Sweden, and then the news said it was Europe. So we did that.
Because I put my plastic card in there, and all of a sudden I was the owner of Bitcoins.
we stopped using that.
That's the card.
We stopped using that. Our Bitcoin ATM didn't have, so we only did it for fun, sort of, at events where we could identify the people that were there. But for practical reasons, we are no longer supporting that business. There's still a company that I think does it, and of course it's more anonymous, although they might require KYC on that ATM now as well. But yeah, there's an ATM machine, so you can put in money, and then it will send money to your Bitcoin address as well. Yes?
Yeah, actually, a question about your company. Like
Yes.
How many people are working there? How's it going?
Yeah.
How's everyone doing? Like everything like that.
Yeah, so we were founded in 2013, and in the first year it went really well because the Bitcoin price went like that. So any volatility we make a lot of money off. And we've been processing, it's going well, but it's not as profitable as we would like it to be. And that's mainly because this adoption is not going from speculation to anything else. But we have about 30-something thousand users. We process over 100 million SEK through our platform. So it's going quite well. We raised over $1 million in funding from the top names in the ecosystem. The largest Bitcoin fund in the world invested twice in us. Former head of equity research, Swedbank invested in us and stuff like that. So it's been going well. We have a team of 6 full-time and an extended team of, let's say, 12, 15 in total. So we've been steadily building in our quiet cave for the last years. So it's going well, but it just takes time. That's the main thing, and it's really hard to get, particularly bank relationships that we've been working on. We were the first company in the world that closed a commercial deal with a tier 1 bank around Bitcoin, it was Barclays. We went in the Techstars program in London. So that was a very big deal. So our branding sort of and our company really got on a higher level with that deal. So we have pretty good conversations with all, for instance, the Nordic banks and other banks as well. How can we cooperate with some commercial discussions with them as well? But it's a very it takes a lot of time. That's
Adoption.
the main thing. Yeah.
Question out there.
Yeah, are you guys mining bitcoins as well?
Our very early first investor, who was 80 years at the time, was all into mining. Our head of compliance actually started with mining with altcoins. So we have experience with it, but we don't do it ourselves.
Because I got a little concern, maybe you can take that away. Is it correct that if there's a limited amount of bitcoins that ever will exist?
Yeah.
So, and then
21 million.
yeah, and that the mining of a bitcoin takes more and more computer power.
Yes.
So it's more and more difficult. Are you not creating then, it's only the happy few that can go mining the last bitcoins?
So the mining is a very professionalized industry today, right? So you used to, so mining is the process of...
Sorry, what's mining?
I'm going there. So it's the process of creating bitcoins and it's validating the transactions. It's actually 2. So that's what gold miners. So these computers are retained in the ledger. Those computers are called miners. And it used to be that with a simple computer chip on your regular laptop, you were able to mine some bitcoins and you would get bitcoins on your Bitcoin wallet in that way. Since then, it's been highly professional. I have some cool slides that I should show.
But before you go off track, because the question was, are you not on a track that the rich get rich? And in fact, it's the poor ultimately paying the game.
I like to explain it in long, complicated answers. Because it touches upon quite a few things. But okay, the simple answer is that compared to the current system that you have quantitative easing, your purchasing power goes down by default. Right? So the theory is that if you have a currency with a limited supply, of course there is a small inflation rate and it will stop, that the means for people that don't have a lot of money is actually, they can actually save money for the first time in their life because theoretically it would appreciate in value as opposed to the other way around. And the wealth distribution, as far as I know, is healthier than the world's wealth distribution that it is today within the Bitcoin protocol. Although to many it's still a little bit skewed because the people who started with it, they are holders and there are people, you have the United States government that has a lot of coins. I think they sold most of them out, but you have certain people that own a lot of Bitcoins, which is a complication. Like this is the founder, the biggest concern that I would have with the ownership of Bitcoin is that the original creator of Bitcoin has over, I think, 1 million, is it 1 million guys in the back? 1 million Bitcoins? Around 1 million, right?
More than.
More than 1 million Bitcoins. Which means that if it becomes a global reserve currency, we would have the first trillionaire, which is kind of mind-boggling. So that, that person that has that much wealth as one individual could obviously have a major impact on the rest of the world. But otherwise, the wealth distribution is actually healthier as I understand it, and the means of saving, and that's the more important one, because it's a limited supply and you cannot just print more money, is actually in favor of people who have no purchasing power today.
So some pros and cons. We're going to have a final question. I would like really, if that's okay with you as well.
Yeah, I don't have to finish slide, but it's
half past 7 to make sure that we also have time to sort of mingle and sort of catch up.
Always last longer my presentations.
Yes, the bar.
One more question about, you talked about the different types of crypto money, somewhere I picked up, I don't know exactly, but is that the banks are getting more interested and are looking at their own type their own version of it. I mean, you talked about corporate and central banks. What's happening? So beyond getting more adoption on the whole technology, what is happening from the banking side? What is
I have a slide on that as well. I have a slide on everything, but I think it's a good overview slide of at least what's happening in. So what we're seeing now is that the investment of what the banks are doing is that they're looking more at these consortiums. So you have a consortium like R3, which has, I don't know what number of banks they have, but let's say, I think I have the number here. They have 45 financial institutions backing them now, and they have created a consortium like how can we use blockchain technology to improve everything, and they create their own platform. So what you see, like SEB joined that, you see Nordea joined that, Danske Bank joined that, you had Swedbank who appointed the head of blockchain, you have Handelsbanken who's actually dealing with most of the cryptocurrency businesses, interestingly enough. And you saw also SEB who did the investment in the Bitcoin side of things. So what the smart financial institutions are doing is hedging their bets. So they're exploring, the large banks like Barclays are exploring the trade finance cases, and they're exploring, can they, they're part of the R3 initiative, but they're also looking at cryptocurrency, and they're also looking at Bitcoin. They did the deal with us with Bitcoin. They're looking at, they're now supporting Bitcoin businesses with bank accounts. So it's basically spreading your bet, as it's too early to tell. The initiative of creating their own coins, you have UBS who created a settlement coin that they're trying now to push across the finance sector. The difficulty for financial institutions to win on the cryptocurrency side, as opposed to central banks, who I think could be more successful, is that the other banks will not play ball with them. Whereas with a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, it's just bottom-up adoption. So you're really talking about top-down implementations with financial institution on uniting around the currency, or any kind of initiative. I think the same problems persist in the R3 consortium. To do something between these parties that historically wouldn't necessarily cooperate on that level with these amount of parties. And that's the interesting dynamic, that you have this bottom-up and top-down innovation.
Great. Thank you. This was a very challenging subject.
Sorry.
For all of us. But it is something that is potentially being called in the economics. It's something that might transform the way we run our dealings, our interactions.
Yeah.
And I read in a newspaper article not very long ago about a Peruvian professor who was Nobel laureate. I forget his name. It's Guzman, I think it's called, but I may be wrong. Who said that the biggest hurdle against removing poverty was the fact that people didn't have proper title to their land.
Right. Yeah.
Proper title to the land. And I think one of the interesting things I thought with blockchain was a very, very practical application, where I know a number of countries are actually experimenting with that, is that to replace the distributed paper-based registries that are open to corruption and to delays in courts, let me say, fighting over who owns what, with a transparent blockchain registry, where everybody...
It's a Swedish company that actually is working with that.
Could be. And I know that Guatemala and Greece, are two countries where they're looking at that. Could be a way of actually solving and giving access to the millions of having direct title to the lands.
Yeah.
And if there's any example of why something like this could really transform, I thought it was a great example.
Yeah.
Now, that is in one area. The other big area is how to get us all...
I have another one, the diamond trade. There is a company that we were sitting with in Techstars that are registering diamond on the blockchain as part of the Kimberley process to avoid like the blood diamonds. Also a very practical one that I think is quite powerful.
Your challenge with us is, as consumers, to make sure that we adopt it and we see the benefits of it. I was saying this for your company. But tonight, you've given us some insights around what sits behind it and some reasons on why we might need to take it serious. And we really like to thank you for joining us tonight and sharing that insight with us. We wish you a lot of success with Safello. We're going to give you something to... I'll write the date on it. This is what we always give to our speaker.
I love that.
This is our microphone. This is very digital. And we have something for you to enjoy. For all the others, we continue the session with Schuil Frank to discuss these things. This is for you to enjoy.
Thanks so much. Thank you.